Let's not beat around the bush. Netflix's The Witcher is an absolute failure. I know it, you know it, even some people that made it know it. And those that don't, frankly shouldn't even be put in charge of doing my laundry, not to mention taking on one of the best fantasy stories ever. So that's it? Video's over? Nothing left to say about The Witcher? Not quite. Although this travesty couldn't really be avoided, at least not as much as for The Witcher to truly become great, most of the discourse around this series revolves around the most obvious culprits. Namely Lauren S. Hisrich, Tomasz Bagiński, and the whole Netflix corporation. They are most definitely guilty, don't get me wrong, but there is a lot more to this story. And some of it needs a perspective of a Pole like myself. In Poland, liking The Witcher before it was fashionable isn't really that much of an individual accomplishment. First, everybody fell in love with Andrzej Sapkowski's books. Then came a failure and total embarrassment of a Polish movie and TV series, The Hexer.
Smoku, jesteś piękny.
And finally, we got the game. Our game. Something that every one of us dreamed about for years. We had something great, then something bad, and great again.
Which was the style at the time? Now, where were we? Oh, yeah. The important thing was that I had an onion on my belt, which was the style at the time.
The public perception of those things shifted in some ways over the years. But it was all generational, and that means we both lived through all possible stages of Witcher's evolution. The highest highs, the lowest lows, and the infuriating boredom of middling middles. But at what stage of that evolution are we right now? I would say somewhere between two very different periods. The one that ended with Season 3 and Henry Cavill leaving, and the uncertain future that's ahead of us. Firstly, let's focus on the present and its relationship with what came before. The Witcher is a bad show, and last season didn't really improve the situation all that much. The one worst thing about those episodes wasn't even that the story was going nowhere, the dreadful pacing, ruined characters, or the strange sidelining of Geralt. No. What really comes to mind is how desperate the writers were to regain the viewer's trust by randomly calling on important moments from the books. The Dear Friend bit and Yennefer calling Ciri my ugly one are some of the many examples. Side note, it's such an uninspired translation of Brzydulko that it actually hurts me. Still, being a bit more faithful to the books made Season 3 slightly better, but at what cost? It only reminded us of much better things from the past. In the books, the Dear Friend letters were an incredibly humorous moment that elevated Yen's and Geralt's relationship and showed that when it comes to romance, the White Wolf can be a bit of a bumbling fool. Just like many of us. And Yen grilled him for that in an absolutely delicious way. Just compare this excerpt from Blood of Elves to what Netflix did years later. Brzydulka, on the other hand, worked because Ciri was much younger in the books and had an actual mother-daughter relation with Yennefer, with Geralt too, of course. In the show, it simply doesn't make any sense. There Geralt and Ciri never even meet before the big reunion at the end of the first season. And that's why that meeting feels so flat and unemotional. Say what you will about the Hexer, but at least it did that scene much better.
Urwał, widząc małą, szczuplutką, popielatowłosą istotkę idącą wolno za chłopcami. Dziewczynka spojrzała na niego. Zobaczył wielkie oczy, zielone jak trawa wiosną, błyszczące jak dwie gwiazdeczki. Zobaczył, jak dziewczynka podrywa się nagle, jak biegnie, jak usłyszał, jak krzyczy cienko i przenikliwie. Wiedźmin odwrócił się od konia błyskawicznym, zwinnym ruchem i pobiegł na spotkanie. Spotkali się na środku podwórka. Popielatowłosa dziewuszka w szarej sukieneczce I białowłosy wiedźmin z mieczem na plecach, cały w czarnej skórze lśniącej od srebra. Wiedźmin w miękkim skoku, dziewuszka w truchcie. Wiedźmin na kolanach, cienkie rączki dziewuszki dookoła jego szyi, popielate mi się włosy na jego ramieniu.
Geralt!
Even with 2001 Polish acting style, it just feels much more believable. Anyway, trying to ineptly rectify the mistake of making Yen a crazy maniac in the second season can be done by simply borrowing a completely different part of the books. And giving her and Ciri a mother-daughter relationship can't be done at all. In my opinion, the decision to cast two actresses in almost the same age as Ciri and Yen, respectively, was the single biggest mistake of the whole show, and the writers ruined the premise from the very beginning. Some of you might say that all the stuff I just mentioned didn't really need much of a strictly Polish insight. Everybody could see how dumb the writers made Yen in the second season, and to be completely honest, Ciri in the third, and every avid reader of the Witcher books can tell how little the showrunners actually cared about the original story. I mean, they changed so much for such absurd reasons. But I do have one special card up my sleeve. I know Andrzej Sapkowski much better than most of the foreign fans. And it's a little strange to me how most of them have completely cut him out of the equation. Everybody talks about George R.R. Martin and his commitment to Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. Everybody laments how J.R.R. Tolkien is probably rolling in his grave after the Rings of Power. Yet nobody ever mentions Sapkowski in relation to Netflix's The Witcher. He's very much alive, cares deeply about his works, and has probably the sharpest tongue out of all the authors I just mentioned. He's also a polyglot and could freely talk with the showrunners if he really wanted to. So why isn't he blamed for his travesty in the slightest? How did the man, who very publicly criticized and fought with CD Projekt Red over the money, became so meek and disinterested in the face of Lauren S. Hisrich of all people? Let's try to get to the bottom of this. Andrzej Sapkowski ended the original Witcher series in 1999. And then wrote something of an unofficial epilogue with short story Something Ends, Something Begins in the year 2000. After that, he concentrated on other projects, mainly his wonderful Hussite trilogy and much less regarded standalone The Viper. The thing is, he did come back to Geralt's world one more time. Not every Witcher fan from UK or US knows about Season of Storms, which was published in 2013 in Poland and translated 5 years later into English. Let me tell you, Season of Storms is a weird book. It takes place somewhere in between the short stories told in The Last Wish, and tells a pretty inconsequential story about Geralt and Dandelion's quest to retrieve White Wolf's lost swords. It's not in any means a bad book. It has some of the charm of the original works, but it lacks purpose more than the Witcher showrunners lack the ability to make their Aretuza plot interesting. And the thing is, that was the last book Sapkowski has ever written. At least until now. Before the first season, back when we still had some hope for The Witcher, Sapkowski was actually quite actively talking with media about the adaptation. At least as actively as he can be, and Netflix used him heavily in promoting the series. He came to the set multiple times, was interviewed by Lauren Hisrich, and had full access to the scripts. He chose not to intervene and left a lot of freedom to the writers. At least that's what he had been told. And while we can't say for sure whether it was his decision or it was made by the showrunners, Sapkowski's involvement in the projects have been diminished with every new season after this. By the time the second batch of episodes came, only Polish viewers got an interview between Baginski and Sapkowski, which however had zero questions about the TV series. And recently, all we ever got in regards to the Polish offer and Netflix's The Witcher was an interview made by Hisrich while promoting Blood Origin, in which he said Sapkowski went to the set and was impressed by Kermoren, so that happened probably during the work made on the second season, read the scripts, but wanted nothing to do with the day-to-day part of the process. I quote, "Andrzej and I have had many conversations, and one of the things he always said to me is, the books exist. So obviously I'm going to base things on the books, and hope to honor the tone of the books. But he basically had said, if I wanted to write a TV show, I would have written a TV show. I wrote books." Then he goes back home to Łódź and is like, great, tell me when it's done. And I do get part of Sapkowski's reasoning. Unlike Martin, he doesn't have any real experience writing TV scripts. So it's not like he could just barge in and do any of them on his own. That, however, does not mean that he couldn't be more involved and more protective of his quote-unquote child. He didn't want that. And I know some of the Witcher fans don't believe he's rich, because she lied quite a few times about various things from the series. But unless Sapkowski or anybody else close to the process denies her claims, the only reasonable thing we can do is take them at face value. Sure, when she says Sapkowski likes the TV show, we can confront it with his own answer, made during the Taipei International Book Exhibition in 2023. The 75-year-old writer had this to say when asked about his opinion on Netflix adaptation. "I've seen better, I've seen worse." Which is a very Andrzej Sapkowski answer. He never really likes to answer straight. He's such a cheeky little bastard like that. But I want to make one thing clear. In his language, that does not mean endorsement. Maybe he can say anything against the series because of a signed contract for the rights. We don't know the details. But even if he could, he probably would not give an easy to digest answer either way. Irregardless of Sapkowski's personal feelings on the matter, he still chose a different path than George R.R. Martin. A path Tolkien never even had a chance to consider. And you can give Martin all the flack you want for his extremely slow process of writing The Winds of Winter. But we all saw what happened when he separated himself from Game of Thrones TV show. I personally refuse to let Sapkowski walk away scot-free. He's not blameless in what we all had to endure while watching The Witcher. He's part of the reason we ended without any protection from the writers who hated the books, as a former staff writer on The Witcher Beau de Mayo have claimed. By the only strictly Polish voice in all of this ended up being Tomasz Bagiński, who, let me remind you, have said in the past that people raised on TikTok want only pure emotion, that the younger the viewer, the less important logic is. And most recently, excuse simplifying, aka dumbing down, the political part of the plot because of the Americans. It's the same story over and over again. The same as getting rid of fantasy in Game of Thrones so that mothers and NFL players can watch. That disrespect, I mean that kind of thinking about your own audience, is simply unforgivable. And people didn't forgive and will not forget. Nobody really has any hope that season 4 with Liam Hemsworth can save anything. I mean, most of the people won't even watch it. And while the House of the Dragon has showed us that the fanbase can be rebuilt, at least partially, I won't hold my breath for anything even remotely close happening for The Witcher. And the lack of our own George R.R. Martin is a part of it. Andrzej Sapkowski is definitely not the one that made this show as horrible as it is, but he could have improved it, and I'm certain of that. But I will give him one thing. His chosen path may still turn out to be the better one. While George saves the shows from damnation, he himself rots in hell of unfinished book series. Sapkowski didn't help with The Witcher, but instead is close to finishing a new book. Yes, you heard me right. It's now confirmed that we'll get a new prequel or sidequel about Geralt somewhere in the next year. We heard rumors about that and were teased by Sapkowski himself for years. But now, he has finally given us quite an exact date of publication. During a Q&A with Ukrainian fans, the men behind the Wife Wolf have said, "I reluctantly talk about anything I do before I finish doing it. Simply because I tend to believe it doesn't exist before it's done. But I always make an exception for Ukrainians, and will do now one as well. I'm working on a new Witcher book, quite urgently. It will take maybe a year, not more." What do we currently know about that still unnamed book? Not much, but Sapkowski has revealed just a few days ago on public Polish radio that it will be a novel, since writing short stories is too hard. He was also much more cordial when talking about the possible 2024 release. Who can even say? It all depends on the muse, whether she will fly over the estate or not. Just classic Sapkowski. If that book turns out not only to be better than Season of Storms, but on par with the main series, all will be forgiven. That's for sure. Those are quite big shoes to fill, especially after 10 years without a new novel. But maybe, just maybe, we will read a new adventure of Geralt of Rivia while still making angry memes about Martin's slow pace. And Old Man Sapkowski will have a last laugh, just how he usually had in the past. Thank you so much for watching Culture Leviathan's first ever video on YouTube. The Witcher may have turned out to be a failure, but in the vast world of pop culture there is a lot more to talk about. And we plan to cover things from Western comic books and manga to movies, TV shows and novels. If you liked what you saw, please like, comment, subscribe, or engage with our accounts on social media. Links to them are in the description box below. Heck, Comment even if all you want to say is,
This video is the biggest load of hoo-ha I've ever seen. Why do you insist we watch this stupid thing?
Am I the only one who understands the complexities of this ambitious cinematic masterpiece? This movie isn't stupid! You're stupid!
Oh, Billy, why you gotta be like that?
I'll still be interested in what you think. See you in the next one.